Here are 8 things you might not know about posture. So posture is built up out of different things biologically, right? So on different levels even that create what we would consider good posture, right? So alignment of joints and that you're standing in a way or moving in a way, even sitting in a way, right, that allows for all proper biological functions to occur, right? So starting, well, technically top down, like a big part of posture is also centered in the vestibular system and the visual system. So we use our eyes to constantly measure distance and to kind of resituate ourselves in our environment through our visual system, and we get good balance right through the vestibular system, which is your ears, which is like the hairs inside the ear with the little liquid that tells us where we are in time and space, right? Where we're moving and stuff like that. So quite typically, if there's issues there, you're gonna start seeing issues in posture as well, because these issues tend to perpetuate themselves on a neurological level, right? So that's pretty important. So there's different things that can be done, even just work in with the vestibular system and the visual system, that would improve your posture. The second element is the posterior chain, right? So when it comes to posture, that's kind of the thing that most, let's say, personal trainers, physical therapists, anyone that's coming at it from like a skeletal muscular perspective will start focusing on that. And quite often they tend to just focus on the shoulder blades, but really it's the entire posterior chain that's pulling you upright, right? So building a stronger posterior chain, meaning the back, right? So all the back muscles, your glutes, your butt, your hamstrings, and even your feet, right? That they're all parts, or your calves are all part of the posterior chain. A stronger posterior chain will contribute to better posture. The third principle is elongation, which means lengthening from the spine, right? So you can already see that when I talk about lengthening of the spine, we know from ourselves and just looking at people and how people spend most of their days is that they're not in an elongated position, right? They're generally in a contracted position. So everything is like coming inwards. And most people spending that time in like almost a fetal type position the entire day, right? That's creating postural issues to a certain degree. It's a contributor anyway, but never spending any time on elongation exercises and elongating is actually the thing that will cause a lot of issues, because those muscles just aren't strong enough to keep you upright. Furthermore, the lymphatic system and the diaphragm interplay play a pretty big part. So your diaphragm, it works as an internal stabilizer. That's the muscle that comes up and down when we're breathing. But it also has a lot to say, and we'll get into that later, about how the rib cage works. So as I said, the diaphragm, if it's weak, then you don't have that internal pressure. So then the body will collapse inwards onto its own as well. And if there's nothing pressurizing you from the inside out, then we're gonna have issues there, right? So there's the weakness is generally due that people don't spend much time, training their diaphragm muscle. So the other part of this is that when people don't train that muscle, obviously it doesn't get any stronger, but they're used to breathing in such a way that will weaken the diaphragm, because they're trying to breathe really high and thus also shallow, so the muscle isn't being used, the diaphragm, right? So on top of that, inflammation from lymphatic nodes that connect to the diaphragm muscle, right? If they're inflamed, it can inhibit that muscle from moving or functioning properly or being properly activated, right? So our connection, which of course means that like if I further contribute to poor function of the diaphragm, and if I don't have good lymphatic flow, right, then things get stuck, and that can translate into different types of aches and pains. Another element of posture is where the nervous system fibers for the different branches of the nervous system are located. So a lot of the sympathetic fibers of the nervous system, which is the fight and flight system, right? So the fast acting system of the nervous system, they're located in the thoracic spine. The thoracic spine is basically your chest, right? So from your neck all the way to the middle of your abdomen, or almost your abdomen, the middle of your abdomen. So that part holds the majority of these fibers, meaning that if we're really stressful or a stress occurs, we perform generally that same type of behaving of collapsing inwards, right, to protect our internal organs. So that's that like turtling position. Whenever we're doing, this turtling posture to protect ourselves, it's really when people flinch, right? They'll come inside and they'll try to protect their heads, of course, and their organs by drawing everything in, right? So it's a really a big part of this entire thing that if we keep being stressed and we don't work on our stress levels, those fibers stay active and we stay actively pulled into that position. Another very overlooked part of posture is tongue position. So our resting tongue position should be where the tongue is resting on the roof of the mouth, like all the way pressed in, right? When it's lax, then we're losing that pressure in, well, the jaw, but also coming up, right? So when we think about that extension, this type of behaving isn't happening when there's no pressure in here, right? Then it further contributes to that sinking down. So even just working your tongue strength by pressing it against the roof of your mouth a few times throughout the day, or like in sets of 10 seconds, so like 3 sets of 10 or something, and you build up the time. So just tongue posture or tongue strengthening will actually improve your posture, right? Because it will make the chin come back. It will strengthen all these muscles that are at the back of the throat. I already spoke of the diaphragm, but the pelvic diaphragm is a far less obvious component as it contributes to posture, right? Because technically you want to have the pelvic diaphragm and the diaphragm, and actually your shoulders, align, right? And when this alignment is created, we have better posture. But it's not just about alignment, it's also about the strength of the pelvic floor to get the pelvis, right? So your hips to come into a position that's more neutral, that allows the rib cage, the hips and the shoulders to stack, right? So, and it, of course, like sitting contributes to poor pelvic muscles, but also just not having them trained under load, right? So if we're doing carries, so farmer carries, overhead carries, even deadlifts, squats, so the bigger exercises that require more stability, if we don't use them with a proper load, or we don't train these exercises at all, then our pelvic floor isn't being trained as much, right? So there's a lot of different exercises you can do. Kegel exercises is a part of this. The last element that I've mentioned a few times is about the rib cage in and of itself. So even though the diaphragm is, of course, one of the movers, the primary movers for the way we breathe, these intercostal muscles that line the rib cage are the ones that are supposed to be expanding. And if I have poor breathing patterns or tightness around the rib cage, then that will further contribute to poor posture, because I can't extend. So that part of the elongation is also that my rib cage breathing, right? When I'm elongating, that I have this expansion over my rib cage in 360 degrees that creates that internal pressure, right? It's not just the diaphragm, it's also this rib cage breathing. So that's a part of it that when we're working on our breathing practice and repatterning, that we need to work our way towards proper rib cage breathing, so whole breathing, right? That these ribs are expanding, right? Not flaring, that would be where I'm lifting my ribs, but just pushing them outwards and contracting them in. So that's a pretty big element of posture as well. So then, of course, the conclusion is that all these things need to work together, right? And there's various other elements in there that maybe we don't know about yet, right? So even just feet, even though I didn't mention that specifically, although I put it as part of the posterior chain. If I have a weak feet, that will also contribute to, issues in your posture or postural issues down the line. So strengthening your feet would be another small tip that I would put in the category of the posterior chain, right? So putting this all together, there's always various resources, but just looking at these things, you're thinking about them, you can start looking at the vestibular and the visual system, like with balance drills, with visual drills. The posterior chain is a matter of strengthening everything in the posterior chain, right? Elongation is something that you can train by sitting and extending, right? Which comes with the rib cage breathing, the pelvic diaphragm training. We can do, as I said, working with loads. The tongue position is a simple one that you can do on a daily basis, right? De-stressing will take that turtling, like that collapsing of the thoracic spine out of the picture, and then working on your lymphatic system and your diaphragm is the last part of this. So these are all things that you can do, and I would look into if I want to improve my posture.